Okay. So, UsableNet, they're a great company. They do some cool stuff with ADA, accessibility on the web. They do these reports every year. They just released their report on the 2022 lawsuits and the whole what's going on with that. And it ain't good. Essentially, 2022, there were over 4,000 lawsuits, about the same as there were last year, but number didn't go down. That's bad. And not much has changed. It's still Florida, California, New York. I think Pennsylvania and Massachusetts are now kind of like showing up. New challengers entered. But that isn't to say that if you don't have a physical location in one of those states that you're safe. You're not. They're still suing people in other states. It's just those are where most of them are. Speaking of most of them, 77% of the lawsuits are concerning e-commerce. The other 8%'s food industry, and then sort of everything else is everything else. Everybody needs an accessible website, but if you're selling stuff online or booking stuff online, and you're in Florida, California, New York,
In Albany, New York, Tallahassee, Florida,
or Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, you should probably be verifying whether or not your site's accessible, or you might get sued. The Department of Justice tried to help and failed. They issued some guidance stating, yes, a business's web presence is in fact part of the American Disabilities Act, the ADA. That's what ADA, American Disabilities Act. I didn't state that. If you didn't, you should know that. If you're watching this video, you know what that means, right? They did clarify that the WCAG, the Web Consortium Accessibility Guidelines, does in fact serve as a set of guidelines for the ADA. Now, if you haven't read the WCAG, I don't blame you. It reads like instructions for programming your VCR, but they are useful. And that is what we need to use to determine whether or not our sites are in fact accessible under the ADA. Now, the guidelines aren't laws. They're guidelines. They are what a judge might consider when making their decision. But absent any specific laws, that's the best we have and what we can go on. So when the Department of Justice got into specifically what ADA and the web means, they talked about inadequate keyboard navigation, usable online forms, especially regarding screen readers and how a screen reader can parse through an online form. And you'd be surprised where online forms show up too. Your add to carts, your checkouts, your newsletter subscriptions, your lead generators. These are all online forms. As per the Department of Justice guidelines, they are under the purview of the ADA. They also got into poor color contrast, or using a color as the sole visual indicator of a certain element, saying that, all our links are blue or our highlight is orange. These are things that you also need bold or italic. You need other visual indicators other than color to help with colorblind users. You've also got, of course, lack of alt text on images, which is the sentence you might write within the code specifying what is actually in an image for someone who couldn't actually see that image. And you've got the motion version of that, which is a lack of video captions, especially these days where video is becoming a more and more prevalent feature of websites. They need captions. And it's not getting any easier. Domino's famously fought their ADA lawsuit for 6 years, and as of June in last year, settled. It had gone as far as an appeal to the Supreme Court. The Ninth Circuit had overruled a dismissal from the district court, and it was appealed to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court declined to hear it. So it stopped at the Ninth Circuit. Domino's gave up. The irony is, of course, if Domino's had just settled within the first few months, both parties would have spent way less money on court fees, and most likely that settlement did, in fact, include lawyers' fees. So, as with most of these lawsuits, the people who are truly profiting are the lawyers. But that's why 95% of companies do end up settling. The potential cost of fighting this lawsuit, especially with an uncertain outcome, is just far too great. So what's next? Well, there's a bill in the Senate, H.R. 4998, introduced by Senators Tammy Duckworth and John Sarbanes. It sounds like a pretty reasonable bill, so of course it has no chance of passing because Congress. There's also many people who have been turning to overlays. In a previous video I mentioned Accessibility. There are several other alternatives. They are all the hottest of garbage. Do not use an accessibility overlay. They don't work. I will defer you to overlayfactsheet.com, linked in the description below. If you'd like some more info, don't use overlays. They don't work. They will get you sued. All you can really do at this point in time is make sure your dev team or whomever is responsible for maintaining the code on your website is doing some form of ADA testing and remediation for every new feature and content release that goes out on your site. Ideally, the stakeholders, the business owners, the e-com managers, the project managers themselves would be well versed in the scanners such as Wave and Axe, or even better, screen reader and keyboard navigation tools that a person with disabilities would actually use to navigate a website. Because at the end of the day, if you, with your keyboard and a screen reader turned on, can do everything on your website that an abled person can do, you're in good shape. The WCAG has guidelines, but if you can prove that your site has feature parity, that the experience on your website for a person without disabilities is equal to that of a person with disabilities, then you're in good shape. And the WCAG guidelines, the scanners, all those are just details that can be very easily and cheaply refuted in court, should you decide to go that route. I'm not a lawyer, not advising you. This is just what I've seen in my own personal experience and the experience we've had here at SwiftKick Web. So that's the latest with ADA. I highly recommend you head over to UsableNet. We at SwiftKick use them. They've got some fantastic webinars you can join. They're a really great company. We're not in any way affiliated. They got some great webinars, some great info. Definitely check them out. There's also some other links that we'll include in the description. Ally Project, some other good resources if you're interested in learning more about this. And now let's talk about some records. So this week we've got Ardor by Big Brave. I think is their first album. It's my favorite. I've described this album in the past as the sound of dying alone on the tundra, surrounded by wolves. If that sounds pretentious, so be it. They're loud and cold and ambient, and there's nothing else like them. It's released back in 2017, and it's one of the all-time great power trios. 3 people, an immense amount of sound coming from just 3 instruments. Definitely worth your time. Check it out. Ardor by Big Brave. Later.